reports are coming in that a man in Spain has woken up in the morgue just before his autopsy.
Gonzalez Jimenez, known to his friends more commonly as Gonzi, was found just before the autopsy surgeon sliced open his chest. He was declared dead previously by 3 separate medical doctors.
However, a segment of the local population are saying that the medical explanation of catalepsy, a form of epilepsy whereby your muscles become rigid and you look like you may be dead, is actually bogus. What they say really happened was that Gonzalez died and has come back to life. In other news, aliens from the multiverse have contacted us. No, don't worry about that. Gonzalez, true story actually, happened in Spain. A guy with catalepsy, where basically, looks asleep, looks dead, muscles very rigid. Everyone thinks he's dead, wakes up, and everyone's very, very scared, as you can imagine. Yeah,
so he was actually, this is January 2018, I just saw on IFL Science. He was actually declared dead by 3 separate medical doctors, found to be actually alive just before they cut him open to find out what had gone wrong.
Is it unique?
It's not unique, happens all the time, actually. So you type in Daily Mail, man pronounced dead, still alive.
It's about 5% of their overall content.
There's a lot of content there. Yeah. I don't know why Daily Mail love this stuff.
No, I do.
Right, yeah. So anyway, so there is a lot out there. This happens all of the time. And it's important because there are 2 different explanations that we gave you in that little news segment of us in our,
Irrational Religious News.
Yeah, absolutely. There are 2 explanations you could have. You could say, well, actually, this guy was wrongly pronounced dead and he was alive all along, and actually when they were just about to cut him open, the reason he was alive was because he'd never died.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we would call the rational explanation.
Yeah.
The other explanation was the one that we offered, which wasn't something that his family and friends...
Was an embellishment.
That was a bit of an
no
embellishment.
No offence, Gonzalez.
Oh, yeah.
Friends and family.
That it was a sign of God that he had died and come back to life. With respect to the 2 explanations that we've just offered there, why is it that the first one is more rational and the second one is more irrational? And we would say that it's actually, some people would say, it's Occam's razor, which is another way of saying that it's actually the inference to the best explanation.
Which is another way of saying it's...
bloody obvious.
It's the scientific way of looking at things, where you say, okay, I've got a thing which happened, what is the more likely cause of it? Is it this thing which happens all the time, or is it this thing which is extraordinarily unlikely and barely ever happens and probably has never ever happened?
Has never happened.
Yeah.
Right. So inference to the best explanation is a tool of reasoning used throughout science. It's also known as abduction, and it's used explicitly in the intelligent design community, many of whom are Christians.
Yeah.
Not all of whom, of course, there are agnostics.
But it was developed as a way of expressing what is normal scientific reasoning. This is just how we think about things.
Exactly.
You see, for instance, let's say you go to the mountains. I just want to give a quick example.
Sure.
So let's say you go to the mountains and you're looking at a rock face and you see, oh my God, is that a nose? And is that an eyebrow? So you see a bit of a nose and a bit of an eyebrow. And you think, well, what did someone come here and chisel that out? But actually you look at it, you know what? I think it's just the way that I'm looking at it. If you have normal geological processes, mountains going into each other, and various things happening geologically. Okay, I'm not a geologist, all right, I admit it. Okay, but various geological processes. If you do that happens a billion times, you're going to have a few times where you're going to get something that looks like a face
from where you're standing, and then you move a little bit, and it no longer looks like a face. Right.
But if you go to Mount Rushmore, very different situation. You have
4 faces of presidents.
4 American president faces up there.
They look like that, whichever direction you're looking at the map.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty specific stuff. It's pretty precise.
It's clearly obvious, right, that the only thing that could have caused that effect would be a person chiseling away for 40 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you'd say normal geological processes aren't sufficient to explain that effect in question.
Absolutely.
So you have different possible explanations. You choose between them based on the effect that you see and which is more likely.
Right, so with Gonzalez, for example, when we look at the case of Gonzalez, pronounced dead by 3 separate people, and then seen actually alive just prior to the autopsy, what's more likely? That 3 separate doctors got it wrong, or that a man died and came back to life? Obviously it's the former. Obviously he wasn't actually dead, he was in a comatose state. He was in a state that looked like death. Why are we actually discussing this?
Yeah.
And the reason we're discussing this is because it goes to the heart of an event in human history that has been what we would say widely misunderstood, often widely misrepresented, and that sits at the heart of the birth of atheism in the modern day.
And
what is that event?
It can be encapsulated in,
if you haven't got it already,
in the modern phrase, what would Jesus do? Or more precisely, what did Jesus do? Right?
Oh, sorry, that was a very intemperate
peace be
laugh.
upon him. The crucifixion story, right? So this is the fundamental story in the whole of Christian civilization, which became Western civilization, which took over the world and has colonized the world both materially and culturally. It's unbelievably important. I would also say it's important in terms of atheism. If you look at the birth of atheism in the modern day, we believe that it's actually, in a sense, an unwitting child of Christianity. Why do we say that? I say that because when you look at history, you see a clear timeline. I won't go into the details, but I'll give it in rough outline. You have the birth of, or the growth of literacy in Western Europe. You have contact with the Muslims, whereby they end up translating a lot of the Muslim works in sort of 11th, 12th, 13th centuries.
And taking more baths.
It's true. You have the publishing press with Gutenberg and his press. You have the widespread growth of books. You have the Bible being translated into local languages, and that the Protestant Reformation happens. What that basically signifies is independent thinking. You get people, the Western Europeans rationally advancing. Okay, then they become better in technology. They have better sciences, and then they start to see that their scientific discoveries are clashing with their religious tenets. You have a big reaction from the religious world, you have a big reaction a bit later from the scientific world, and basically science wins. Okay?
Yeah,
and I think that is actually an accurate
and the reason it wins
explanation
is because Christianity loses because of inference to the best explanation.
Yeah.
It loses because scientists who use inference to the best explanation every day apply it to the crucifixion story and the concept of the resurrection of Jesus, and they say, well, hold on a second, there's this event which was completely unwitnessed, insofar as nobody saw Jesus come back from the dead, okay? Completely unwitnessed, unique in human history, and has no analogy.
I would say that the retrospective interpretation, or the difficulty with the crucifixion narrative, is one part of large problems, I would say, with Christianity, that some of its fundamental tenets are very difficult to reconcile with reason. So, for instance, the idea of the Trinity, that God is one and three. I've never heard a coherent explanation for this. Many Christians themselves have doubts about this. They also don't see how God killed himself / his son for the sins of other people. So you have one people doing the crimes and you're punishing someone else. And then you have the crucifixion story. So taken as a whole, Christian theology, I would say, is quite difficult to reconcile with reason, which is why people often, when they go to priests, they say, oh, have faith. Have faith is a byword for basically, it doesn't make sense, but you should have faith because that's what will bring you merit. And people, when they're becoming so advanced in science, they'll think, well, actually, I'm making progress and I'm having merit because of using my reason, not because of neglecting my reason.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
So let's go into this. I know you're itching to go into the crucifixion story and to explain why you think there is an explanation of it which is somewhat analogous to what we said with Gonzi earlier.
Okay, so first of all, it's not my explanation. It's the explanation given by the founder of the Ahmadiyya community in his book Jesus in India.
Yep.
And he stated very simply that Jesus was a man who claimed to be from God, gave certain teachings, was a very profound spiritual teacher of humanity, and that he was taken and he was put on the cross. Before he was put on the cross, however, he prayed to God in the Garden of Gethsemane, "My Lord, take this bitter cup of death away from me, not as I will, but as you will."
And what was his prophecy before?
And his prophecy before that was that his great sign, that his great miracle for this wicked and adulterous generation, is what he said, would be the sign of Jonah. And the sign of Jonah was that Jonah, who was a prophet of God, went onto a boat after leaving his people. Well, the boat capsized, he fell into a stormy sea. Everybody else in that situation would die. Jonah was swallowed in an extraordinary circumstance by a whale, and he stayed in the belly of the whale alive throughout the whole ordeal, and then was then vomited out onto a seashore. But for the grace of God upon somebody whom he loved, Jonah would have actually died. Okay? So when Jesus says, "My sign will be the sign of Jonah," it clearly means that he will actually survive like Jonah, that he will be in a circumstance whereby he would actually be put in a situation where anybody else would have died, and he will survive because of God's love for him. Now, Christians often say, well, actually, the sign of Jonah in respect of Jesus was that he was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, and Jesus was in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. Except that Jesus wasn't. He was put on the Friday night, and he came out on the Sunday morning. It's 2 nights and a day and a half. Okay. So it doesn't even apply there. So the sign of Jonah wasn't about the fact that he was in the belly of the whale for a few days. Or it was the days that actually was the great sign.
Which don't match.
Which don't match anyway. The great sign of it was the actual fact that he was alive in an extraordinary circumstance. Right, so Jesus makes this prophecy.
Survival is going to be a sign.
Yeah, so then he goes and prays in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before, praying, "Don't let me die, God." And then he even says God accepted his prayer. He's then put on the cross.
Why is he put on the cross? Because according to Deuteronomy, the Jews believe that anyone who dies on wood who is hanged is accursed of God. So the Jews, the Orthodox Jews, the Pharisees and Sadducees and their followers who hate Jesus and Jesus' new Jewish following, they say, we want to prove that you're false, so we're going to put you and hang you on the cross so that we can show that you're accursed.
Yeah.
Right?
So basically, that's what happens. He gets put on the cross. He's starting to lose consciousness. He says, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? Okay, which sounds like he doesn't want to be there. And then he seems to lose consciousness. Now, the Roman guards who are there, they see him lose consciousness and they think, oh, well, is this chap dead? Right? So usually what they would do is they break the legs of a person if they want to make them die quicker. So they do this with the other two thieves who were with him because they think, oh, well, they aren't dead and the sun's coming down and we need to get these people off the cross. So they break the thieves' legs and the legs, they die, it says in the Bible. They come to Jesus and he's unconscious, right? He's not talking. And they say, he's already dead, right? Then they take a spear and to check if he's dead, they cut him. And he doesn't make a response. But blood and water gushes out of his body, which doesn't happen with a dead body. Blood and water only gushes out of a living body. And it's also a contradiction. A lot of Christians say, well, they took the spear and thrust it into his chest to pierce his heart, which makes no sense because in the line beforehand it says, they say, oh, this man's already dead, so don't break his legs. So you don't take your spear and thrust it into the heart of somebody who you think is dead.
Yeah.
The only reason you would cut him on the side was to check if he is dead in accordance with your thinking, as a primitive means to that if he's alive, he would at least make a groan in response to the pain.
Yeah.
He makes no response. Blood and water gushes out. They don't recognise that that's a sign of life, a beating heart, which we would today. And he's taken down from the cross. Then healing herbs are applied to his wounds by his physician Nicodemus. He's put in a cave for 3 days, 2 nights, right, and 1.5 days. He comes out, then dressed as a gardener, finds his followers. They say, "Are you a ghost?" He says, "No, I'm not a ghost." The definition of a ghost is somebody who died, right, and then is seen after the act of dying. So the fact that he says, "I am not a ghost," is literally him saying, "I did not die." So people say, oh, where's the evidence that Jesus didn't die on the cross? Well, he said he didn't die on the cross. He said he didn't die. Okay?
And he said he wouldn't die before.
Exactly. He said he wouldn't die before. He prayed not to die. As he thought he was dying...
He said his sign would be not dying.
Yes, exactly. As he thought he was dying, he said, "Why have you forsaken me, God?" And then afterwards, he's like, "I'm not a ghost."
Yeah.
And then he eats bread and fish with them. And Doubting Thomas, what does Doubting Thomas do?
He puts his fingers into his wounds because he can't believe that Jesus is really there in the flesh in front of him.
Exactly. So he says, put your hands in here. Jesus says, put your hands here and put your hands here. I'm not a ghost, for a ghost does not have flesh and blood as I have.
Yeah.
So clearly, Occam's razor, inference to the best explanation. Jesus didn't die on the cross. There was no resurrection. He didn't die for your sins. The whole concept of the New Testament salvation method is completely wrong. Basically.
And it was innovated clearly by St. Paul in his epistles. He claimed that this was revealed to him. We can talk about this in another video.
Absolutely.
But the real importance is that this enables Christians to actually have a rational explanation for the crucifixion events. It means that historical Jesus actually makes sense in this interpretation.
Yeah.
There's real evidence for him being there, which we already know. But now there's evidence, for his whole timeline in a scientific way, which means that you can keep the moral teachings of Jesus, keep the fact that he was a divine person in the sense that he was divinely supported, but not actually God, and also be a scientist and be rational. So it's actually an interpretation of the facts which I think both appeals to the mind and to the heart, and it reconciles that rift that has developed between science and the Western culture, because it actually says that your religion can be rational and your science can be rational, and this is the Islamic interpretation of events as given by the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, Hazrat His Holiness Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, and we think it's definitely worth considering of whatever background you're from.
Yeah, and that's in his book Jesus in India, which we'll link in the link below. And basically the book goes into how Jesus actually migrated out of the Roman Empire. He went to the other 10 tribes of Israel, preached to them, ultimately died, and his tomb can be found and visited to this day in Kashmir. As can the tomb of his mother Mary, which is found in the Pakistan town of Murree, named after her grave. So we've really focused in on some of the key points which in actual fact have enabled us to retell the story of Jesus through a means which doesn't require any kind of suspension of rational faculties or suspension of the normal processes we use to explain certain events or effects, namely inference to the best explanation. So what's the take-home message really for atheists, for Muslims, for Christians and for Jews from this?
Okay, so let's start with Christians. So Christians, we've given you a way of understanding the historical Jesus in a way that is rational, that is consistent with the Old Testament prophets, and is consistent with common scientific reasoning. That's quite important because it means that it allows you to keep the historical Jesus while also appreciating his moral teaching. For Jews, it puts the onus on you to actually reevaluate the Jesus story, because now you have a clear understanding of what happened with Jesus that shows he was actually a messianic figure. He was the Messiah for the Jews, and he should be accepted because he said he wouldn't die. He was supposed to die, he didn't die, and he continued afterwards. So this was a clear indication that he was true, that he was the Messiah, that the Jews are still waiting for 2,000 years later.
Yeah.
For the Muslims, it's important because it means that the second coming of Jesus means that Jesus didn't ascend to heaven like the Muslims actually still think as well, the majority of the Sunni and Shia Muslims. It means that actually he passed away naturally on earth, which means the second coming, which has been foretold in the prophecies of the Quran and the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, must be a metaphorical second coming. Could that second coming be in the person of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, His Holiness, peace be upon him, who was the founder of the Ahmadiyya community? May very well be. You should definitely consider that.
Seeing that he actually came up with this entire theory.
Well, it was the essence of it was revealed to him, and then he was guided with respect to the rest of it. And for atheists, of course, it's the question then for you is, evidently this person, this historical figure that you've rejected, and the whole religion which you've rejected, actually has a pretty sound basis and reason, and you can understand the whole story, and you can see that this person was clearly divinely supported.
Yeah.
So is this a way for you to both believe in religion, similar for Western Christians in many ways, is this a way for you to both believe in religion in a culturally relevant way to you, while also keeping your scientific reasoning? And actually we think all these things merge in Islam, and Islam Ahmadiyya in particular, which we believe is the Renaissance and the bringing back Islam to its true original roots. This is what Islam has. It's basically a rational religion. It allows you to keep...
Oh, funny. It's the title of our channel.
Wow, it's almost like it was intelligently designed. It allows you to keep your scientific reasoning, and it also allows you to have a spiritual and religious life that is not discordant with that scientific reasoning, so you can have your cake and eat it too.
Oh, it's the best of both worlds. Fantastic.
Great. So we hope we fattened you up a little bit, and we'll leave you there to talk to you in future episodes of Believe You Me.
Take care. Peace be on you.